Hey guys and gals, Board now back with you, and I return to Stranger Things. So this is Stranger Things 2, Chapter 4, Will the Wise, my review of it. So full spoilers from the start as always. And I think this one is definitely what my regular co-host Rachel would call a bridge episode. It does feel like a bit of a breather episode after a more dramatic, intense episode last time out. Although it is actually quite an intense episode at times, especially with Will. The Will stuff sort of takes centre stage, and it's really big for that stuff. This season, obviously, for Will has been a big one, but we find out more about what he's going through and start to connect things in how it's going to become important. So after the end of the last episode, where he basically started having some sort of like a seizure, where he was having these visions and he was, reacting strongly to it. And I mean, it did feel like something like a real world disease, like an epileptic sort of fit that he goes into. He almost very trance-like, and Joyce arrives at the school and the gang's all there around him. You've got Max there as well. I mean, she doesn't have much of a role in this episode, but I guess this really freaks her out and she starts asking questions later on, which Lucas kind of says, sorry, we can't really tell you, we could get into trouble, that kind of thing. But I'll say also that Noah Schrupp, who plays Will, really takes centre stage in this episode. He does a really decent job of selling his torment and what he's going through and the psychology. And again, the visuals they provide us of like this upside down world, and also the shadow monster that he keeps seeing, becomes important. And we slowly build to him starting to find a way to communicate. Again, communication is sort of like a theme in Stranger Things. So they take him home and start talking to him, and at one point, it's sort of at the end of the episode, Mike comes round and he knows about the shadow thing, and he says, this is about the shadow thing, really. And you get a situation where Mike is obviously going to be supporting Will and is there with Joyce as he tries to figure things out, because at one point they finally contact Hopper and he's got his own thing going on with Elle, but they finally get through to him and call him round, and Hopper says, tries to get Will to tell him what happens, and in the end they work out the best way is for him to draw. So he starts drawing various things that he's seen. He starts drawing like these lines and these different like sort of, I don't know, trails kind of things on different bits of paper. So by the end of the episode they're starting to like connect that or try to work out exactly what he's seen. And Hopper decides to go back to the site of the pumpkin patch because he's been told, or Joyce tells him again, when they start talking about this trail, he starts, suspecting then, hey, the government may well be behind this, and he remembers what's been going on with the pumpkin patch and how that was sort of like a trail, and he sees something similar in Will's drawing, so he goes to the pumpkin patch site, and that's the dramatic ending of the episode, is that he starts digging up the ground and is looking for whatever's down there, what's going on, and he's actually dragged into the upside down, or falls in. And again, it's really impressive looking. It's very sort of gothic. You've got things like moving about in there, like levitating around him sort of thing, and he's like stumbling around, and I think it's like certainly this sort of version of it, it's the first time he's seen it, and he's taken back. He's like, oh my god, and that's kind of like the dramatic ending. So a lot of stuff to do with Will and what he's going through. It's all very quite intense at times and psychological, and you get different things like obviously the AV club, the gang are still looking for like the Dustin's pet, his creature, which obviously Dustin has found, but he doesn't want to tell them he's found it. And Mike sort of says in this episode, it's more important than ever than we find it and like kill it, because it may have something to do with Will's vision. He's sort of seen it, and it could be dangerous. Dart, of course. And by the end of the episode, Dustin may be rethinking his sort of strategy, because in another pretty great, B-movie monster type scene, it eats the cat. It eats the pet cat. There's a scene where the mother is like putting down the food for the cat and calling its name, whatever the cat's called, and it's not coming back. And later on, Dustin comes home because he leaves it, when he goes to school, puts like a cloth over the glass. Although if it starts making a noise, that's not really going to do much good, Dustin. I just thought I'd point that out to you. But when he comes home, he sees that it's busted through the glass, and he finds it's eaten the cat, or is eating the cat, and is starting to become a lot more aggressive and vicious. And it's really a light bulb goes off in Dustin that, unfortunately, the jig is up with this thing. I probably can't just keep it as a friendly pet after all. So there's definitely going to be more fallout with Dustin and this thing in the next episode. So the big stuff with Hopper and Al, which is the fallout from her obviously going off on her own, and he is smart enough to know that and says, "Did you go and see Mike?" And Al's like, "Well, yeah, but he didn't see me." And they again get into a fight, and the friends don't lie, and Hopper's saying that back to her. It's another intense scene where Elle starts using her powers, and Hopper is like, I think just out of aggression and protection, frustration with her, he's actually quite mean. He's like the meanest we've seen to Elle in this show up to now. Sort of her word for the day is brat, which obviously is really harsh, but she just becomes uncontrollable, starts using her powers towards him in quite a dangerous way, and in the end he like storms out, and the next day says, clean this place up. So it kind of sets them on different path, because obviously I've said what's happened to Hopper by the end of the episode, and with Elle, she starts discovering stuff around the cabin. She cleans up, as Hopper told her to, but she discovers like lab documents underneath the floorboards from like the science lab, from the government lab. And she starts seeing more about her past. She sees a picture of her biological mother, with obviously the Matthew Modine character from the last season, and she starts, tuning into her psychic sort of powers, and she starts finding out, this is my mother, and it draws her more towards that, and sets up that she's obviously going to want to meet up with her mother and sort of meet her for the first time, really. So that's obviously going to become an important thing with Elle in the next episode. So we switch over to the ongoing Jonathan, Nancy, Steve stuff. So first of all with Steve, because he's still being bullied by Billy, who once again is playing basketball with his shirt off, and again, he sort of dominates Steve, and then they're like in the shower afterwards, and Jonathan and Nancy have gone off together, because obviously they've got this plan, or Nancy does, and one of like Steve's quote unquote friend from the last season, the one who was like a real dick, I forget his name now, but he is in there with them, and he's like mocking Steve over Nancy. It's like, oh, she's mysteriously gone off with Jonathan again, but I'm sure it's just a coincidence. Being a real dick. I don't know why we need. I guess we just need him in the scene for like Steve to find that out. But I'm not sure. I hope we don't see this douchebag anymore, because I've seen enough of him to last a lifetime, really. But Billy's in there, and he calls Steve pretty boy or something like that. He says, "Don't worry about it, Steve. Pretty boys like you won't be lonely for much longer. There's plenty of bitches in the sea," which is awful. I'm only going to say that once, but that's a terrible, demeaning term from Billy. But I will just say it did dawn on me for the first time, and maybe this is something like so obvious that I should have picked up on before, but it's almost like I think they're hinting that Billy could be gay, but like he's too proud, too masculine to like maybe admit it, because he's always going around with his shirt off. Now obviously they're in the shower, so that makes sense, but even when they were playing basketball, and he does a lot of the time, and calling Steve a pretty boy, so I'm wondering if they're maybe hinting that he could be gay. But yeah, then this could be him flirting with Steve. Now Steve, I think, needs a bit more of a direction, because so far they haven't done much with him this season, but luckily I think that's going to change from what I can remember. So on to Jonathan and Nancy, called Barb's mum, and they're waiting in the park if there was any suspicious activity captured, and they get taken into the lab. And the Paul Raisin character, well, he gives them a guided tour, and part of his thinking is then this will throw them off the scent, then this will be a way to gain their trust. And what I like about this is he feels like a very different kind of like head, like scientist, like government official from the Modine character. The Modine character was much more icy and kind of creepy, and this character is a little bit of that, but I think this character is a bit more of a politician, a bit more of a, he sort of uses politics and uses maybe a bit more savvy, and I actually quite like this idea that he comes up with to try and throw them off. He gives them a tour of the lab, and he tries to reassure them, says, the bad people who killed your friend, who killed Barb, and who took your son, they're no longer around. We've been called in to clean up their mess. So he sort of presents it in that way, then he's there to clean up the mess, and he shows them like with the flamethrowers, like, destroying like all the upside down stuff and what's in there, the creatures. But of course, with this being Stranger Things and with the characters in the show, Nancy isn't just going to give up, and she's not taking the bait, but she tapes what he says to maybe use against him later on, and she says, "Do you still want to do the plan, Jonathan?" Jonathan says yes, and he's like, "Okay, we'll burn that place down." So good stuff. So they're sort of on their way at the end of the episode. So there you have it. That's Stranger Things. Your thoughts in the comments below. Please like and subscribe. Share me out on social media, and I'll be back with more Stranger Things soon. Thanks for listening.